Welcome to Simplified UPSC by PPP, where we listen, learn, and grow together. Detailed lecture notes in English and Hindi, plus practice questions for prelims and mains, only on our Telegram channel. Link in description. Like and subscribe for more.
Welcome back to the Simplified UPSC by PPP Deep Dive. We're so glad you've joined us for this focused exploration of some really critical geographical concepts. Before we jump in, just a quick and sincere request from our side. If you find these deep dives helpful, if they're really helping you synthesize this complex material, please do consider joining our YouTube membership. Your support, honestly, is what keeps us going. It keeps us motivated to bring you these videos and lets us maintain the high quality of these resources. And of course, a huge thank you to all our existing members. Your contribution is really the engine that makes this comprehensive coverage of the Class 11 Geography Supplementary text possible. Okay, let's get into it. Our mission today is laser-focused on one of India's most frequent and, frankly, most devastating natural hazards, floods. We're tackling Section 2.4, and we're not just going to list facts here. Our goal is to give you a really granular, analytical understanding of flood dynamics, vulnerability across India's key river basins, and, crucially, the management strategies. We want to get into the why and the how, so let's start with the absolute basics.
What exactly are we talking about when we say flood in a technical sense?
Right. At its core, it's about a state of high water level that leads to the inundation of land.
Land that is not usually submerged.
Exactly. That's the key part. It's water going where it doesn't normally go. And what's interesting about that definition is that it covers a huge range of events. It could be a slow, creeping rise in water, or it could be something incredibly sudden.
Like a structural failure.
Precisely. It's not always just about too much rain. A sudden embankment breach, for example, can trigger a catastrophic flood that's almost instantaneous and often far more destructive than a natural overflow.
That distinction between the onset gradual versus sudden, that seems like a really crucial dividing line.
It is, and it leads us straight into the three main types of floods that the sources lay out.
Okay, let's unpack those. The first one, and maybe the most challenging to manage, is flash floods.
Flash floods are all about speed. They happen incredibly rapidly, often within just 6 hours of the start of heavy rainfall.
And they're usually linked to some pretty extreme weather, right?
Absolutely. Think of things like localized cloudbursts, where a massive amount of rain falls in a tiny area very quickly, or, the intense rainfall that comes with powerful storms and cyclones.
The operational challenge there must be immense. If it happens that fast, how do you even warn people?
That's the problem. Even with modern monitoring, the speed of the event can just overwhelm any warning system. Timely evacuation becomes almost impossible in many cases. You're talking about a disaster that unfolds in minutes.
Which is a stark contrast to the second type, riverine floods.
A completely different beast. These are the more, let's say, classic floods we see in India's Great Plains. They're characterized by a much more gradual rise in the river's water level.
So this is when an entire river basin gets sustained. Heavy rainfall over days, not hours.
Exactly. The whole system gets saturated, and the river slowly exceeds its capacity. It affects a much larger area, but that slower onset at least gives you a theoretical window to prepare and evacuate.
Okay, and that brings us to the third type, which feels increasingly relevant, urban floods.
Yes, and this is critical with India's rapid urbanization. With urban floods, the focus shifts. It's less about the natural river and more about the built environment failing.
So we're talking about infrastructure.
We are. The primary cause here is often a blockage in drains. Think about all the waste and debris that can clog them up. Combine that with the loss of natural water-holding areas like wetlands and ponds that we've paved over for construction, and the water just has nowhere to go.
It stays on the surface, causing that localized inundation.
Exactly. It's a failure of human design, not just an excess of nature.
So we've got the types. Let's drill down into the causes.
Yeah.
Obviously, the main trigger is heavy rainfall, but what are the system weaknesses that turn that rain into a disaster?
In the context of India's major rivers, especially in the northern plains, one of the most critical chronic problems is heavy siltation of the riverbeds.
Okay, explain that. What does siltation actually do?
Well, think of a river like a pipe. Over time, sediment and silt wash down from upstream, settle on the bottom. The pipe effectively gets filled up with sand.
So its capacity to carry water is reduced.
Drastically reduced. The riverbed itself rises, which means a normal monsoon rainfall, one the river could have easily handled 50 years ago, can now cause it to breach its banks. This is a key point. Floods aren't just about more rain. They're very often about less capacity in our rivers.
That's a huge analytical point. And there are other triggers too, right? Geological ones.
Especially in the Himalayas, heavy rain can trigger landslides. If a massive landslide comes down into a valley, it can literally block a river, creating a temporary, unstable dam.
And when that dam breaks,
It releases a massive wall of water downstream. It's not technically a flash flood by definition, but it has the same catastrophic, sudden power.
I mean, what about the coasts?
On the coast, you have to worry about cyclones bringing in a storm surge. This is where strong winds and low pressure physically push the sea level up and onto the land. It's a coastal inundation that's completely independent of what the rivers are doing.
Which causes saltwater flooding, a problem we'll come back to.
A huge problem. And finally, let's not forget the man-made causes. We've talked about blocked drains, but even dams and reservoirs can be a factor.
But wait, aren't they supposed to prevent floods?
They are. They're built to store excess water. But if a reservoir is already full and there's more heavy rain coming, operators might be forced to make a sudden, massive release to protect the dam itself. That sudden surge of water can cause devastating floods downstream.
So a safety structure can become a sudden hazard.
It can, if not managed perfectly within the context of the entire basin's weather.
This is where the mechanisms really start to meet India's unique geography. Let's talk about the scale of this problem. The numbers are pretty staggering.
They are. You need to internalize this. About 12% of India's total land area is considered flood-prone.
12%. What does that translate to in actual area?
It's about 40 million hectares. To put that in perspective, that's an area roughly the size of Germany at risk every single year.
And the engine driving all of this is the monsoon.
It's the concentration of the monsoon. India gets about 1,200 millimeters of rain on average annually. But here's the kicker. A massive 85% of that falls in just 4 months, between June and September.
So the entire system is put under intense simultaneous pressure for a short period.
Exactly. It practically guarantees that river carrying capacities will be breached somewhere every single year.
Okay, so to be properly prepared for the exam, we need to know exactly where this happens. Which river basins are the most vulnerable?
Let's start with the big one, the Ganga Basin. It's vast, densely populated, and the river has a very low gradient across the plains. Water moves slowly, land stays saturated for longer, leading to widespread inundation.
And then moving to the northeast, you have the Brahmaputra Basin.
Which is arguably even more volatile. You've got extremely high-intensity rain hitting the young, highly erosive Himalayas. This means the river carries an enormous sediment load through a relatively narrow valley. It's a recipe for disaster.
And the sources list a lot of contributing rivers there. It's probably important to know them.
Absolutely. For prelims, this kind of geographic accuracy is key. You're looking at the Barak, Tista, Torsa, Subansiri, Sankosh, Dihang, and Lohit. Knowing that list shows you understand the complexity of that system.
Okay, what about the northwest?
The Northwestern River Basin. Flooding here can be just as destructive, often affecting huge agricultural areas. The vulnerable rivers are the major ones in the Indus system: Jhelum, Chenab, Ravi, Sutlej, Beas, and Gagra.
And this isn't just a northern problem. The peninsula is also at risk.
Very much so. The Peninsular River Basin faces its own challenges. You have steep ghats causing rapid runoff, and the east coast is vulnerable to cyclones.
So which rivers are we talking about there?
The list is long. Tapti, Narmada, Mahanadi, Baitarani, Godavari, Krishna, Pennar, and Kaveri. Many of these are highly susceptible to storm surges near their deltas, which makes river flooding even worse.
So if you were to boil it down, which states are the most consistently and severely affected?
The sources name 4 in particular: Assam, Uttar Pradesh, Bihar, and Orissa. That really highlights the vulnerability of the Gangetic Plain and the East Coast.
So that's the geography. Let's talk about the consequences. What are the specific adverse effects of these floods?
Well, the most immediate and tragic, of course, is the loss of life from drowning. But just as devastating, especially for the rural economy, is the widespread loss of livestock.
For many families, their animals are their entire savings, their main asset.
Exactly. When a family loses its cattle or goats, their economic recovery is set back for years. It's a crippling blow.
And beyond the immediate disaster, there's often a secondary crisis, right? A public health one.
A massive one. You see a huge spike in the risk of epidemics. Diseases like diarrhea, cholera, and malaria become rampant.
Why is that? What's the mechanism?
It's contaminated water. Floodwaters mix with everything: sewage, garbage, pathogens.
Right.
Drinking water sources like wells get contaminated, and the standing water becomes a perfect breeding ground for mosquitoes, which spreads malaria.
And economically, beyond livestock, the most visible impact has to be on agriculture.
Oh, absolutely. You're talking about vast crop loss as agricultural land gets completely inundated. And because this often happens during the Kharif season, the main growing season, the loss of standing crops is catastrophic.
And the damage isn't just to the current crop, is it? It affects the land itself.
Yes, this is a crucial long-term impact. The floodwaters can erode the fertile topsoil. And critically, in coastal areas that experience a storm surge, when seawater floods the land, you get a serious problem with soil salinity.
The salt makes the land infertile.
It can sterilize it, making it unusable for agriculture for a very long time. It forces people to completely change their livelihoods.
Given this massive, recurrent scale of disaster, let's turn to the protection aspect. What is the management approach?
Institutionally, it's quite systematic. At the national level, the key player is the Central Water Commission, or the CWC. They run the entire flood forecasting network.
So they're the ones monitoring water levels and issuing warnings.
They are. And then at the state level, you have the Irrigation and Flood Control Department that handles the on-the-ground work.
And this isn't a new effort. This has been going on for a while.
Right. The systematic planning really kicked off with the National Program of Flood Management way back in 1954. That program set up the framework we still use today, which divides all the measures into two main pillars.
Structural and non-structural measures.
Exactly. It's a crucial distinction.
Okay, let's take the first pillar. Structural measures. This is the hard engineering, right?
This is the hard engineering. These are physical constructions designed to hold back or divert water. So think of big projects like building storage reservoirs to hold excess monsoon runoff.
Or things like embankments along the river.
Building levees and embankments to raise the riverbanks is a classic example. So are things like channel improvement works, like dredging to remove silt and increase the river's carrying capacity.
And what about the second pillar, the non-structural measures?
This is all about policy, planning, and changing human behavior. It's about reducing our vulnerability rather than just fighting the water.
So this would include something like floodplain zoning.
That's a perfect example. It's a policy tool to regulate and prevent new development in the areas most at risk of flooding. You're essentially telling the river, okay, this is your space, and we'll stay out of it.
Which is tied directly to land use control.
Yes, enforcing no development in high flooding zones and even encouraging people to relocate from the most dangerous areas. It's about reducing exposure. If there's nothing of value in the flood's path, the damage is minimized.
There's also a focus on the individual building level with floodproofing.
Right. This is about designing buildings to withstand floods. So, simple but effective techniques like building homes on stilts or raised platforms.
I see. So the main living area is above the expected flood level.
Precisely. Or even simpler things like designing ways of sealing doors, windows on the ground floor to prevent water from getting in during a short-duration flood.
And to do any of this effectively, you need good data.
You need excellent data. That's where hazard mapping comes in. It uses historical records and surveys to map out which areas are prone to flooding, how often, and how deep the water gets. That map is the foundation for all smart planning.
So the overall strategy really relies on combining these things, using engineered structures like stilts, but also just building away from the water in the first place.
That's the ideal. The goal of all these measures since 1954 hasn't been to stop floods entirely. That's often impossible. It's about providing a reasonable degree of protection to reduce the annual losses.
The sources mention a really interesting community success story that brings these ideas together. The K.H.J. flood shelter model.
Yes, it's a fantastic case study. It involved a big structural measure raising banks by 5 meters, which is significant.
But it was more than just a wall.
So much more. They integrated a livelihood component directly into the project. They built huge ponds for fish farming inside the protected area.
That's brilliant. So the flood protection measure also becomes a source of income and food security for the community.
Exactly. It turns expensive defensive infrastructure into a sustainable community asset. That's integrated resilience in action.
Okay, let's try to synthesize all of this now. Let's frame it around some questions you might face. First, differentiating the flood types and their causes.
Right, you have to keep them clear. Flash floods, rapid, from cloud bursts. Riverine floods, gradual, from sustained basin-wide rain. And urban floods, an infrastructure failure.
And analytically, remember that core difference in cause. Rural floods are often driven by heavy siltation, reducing the river's capacity, while urban floods are about drainage blockage.
It's about understanding the specific system that's failing.
Second key area, Geographical vulnerability. What are the must-know facts?
You have to know the numbers. 40 million hectares are at risk, and that risk is super concentrated because 85% of the rainfall happens between June and September.
And the specific rivers are non-negotiable for prelims.
Absolutely. You need to be able to name rivers in the Brahmaputra system like Barak, Tista, Torsa, Dihang, and Lohit. And know the northwestern rivers like Chelum and Chenab, and the key peninsular ones like Mahanadi and Kaveri.
Finally, mitigation strategies. What's the big takeaway?
That it has to be a dual approach. You can't just rely on structural measures like reservoirs and embankments. You absolutely need the non-structural measures to go with them.
Things like hazard mapping, floodproofing with stilts, and crucially, strong land use control.
Right. The solution isn't just one thing. It's a multi-layered system of engineering, policy, and community adaptation.
So this deep dive really shows that floods in India aren't just a natural event. They're a socio-natural hazard.
That's the perfect term for it. The natural triggers. Heavy rain, cyclones are there. But it's human interventions like deforestation causing siltation or poor urban planning that turn a hazard into a recurring disaster.
Which leaves us with a final thought for you to ponder as you continue your preparation.
We've talked a lot about mitigation through engineering building walls to fight the river and through policy. But what if we thought about it differently?
What deeper, non-technical changes could we make? Perhaps in terms of understanding the river as a living ecological entity, not just a channel for water.
Exactly. What if we focused on restoring natural floodplains and wetlands, allowing them to absorb the excess water naturally? What would be the most sustainable long-term defense?
Ponder that trade-off. Working with the river's natural cycles versus the constant expensive fight to control it.
It's a shift from flood control to flood adaptation. Something to think about.
A final, sincere thank you once again to our Simplified UPSC by PPP members for your crucial support. Is what makes this possible. We'll be back soon with our next deep dive.
Thanks for watching. Follow us on Telegram and Instagram. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.